Assalamualaikum and hi. So we are back again for the second episode of Bina podcast. And together I am Dina and I'm so glad that you are tuning in for our podcast. Okay, so again, today we also have this live streaming during the International Construction Week ICW Borneo edition. And we are here today live within the exhibition center in BCCK Kuching, Sarawak. And together with me, we have, I think, a very great figure all the way. It's quite far away, and let them introduce themselves after this. And before that, our title for today's will be Challenges and Innovation in Construction Technology, Overcoming Industry Challenges. And again, our first speaker for today, let me introduce Professor Patrick, which is a SG Group Senior Sustainability and also advisor and founder of Atelier 10. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, we are great to have you here today with us. And next to Patrick, we have Professor Neil, a founder for Atelier 1. Welcome, Patrick. Sorry, welcome, Neil. Patrick, Neil.
Patrick,
Yeah, all right.
Neil, thank you very
Neil.
much. It's
All right.
very nice to be here. Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right. So yeah, welcome again to Bina podcast. This is like a new initiative of marketing and promotion program by CIDB Malaysia and also from CIDB IBS. So like our objective of having this Bina podcast is to bring an expert like industry like you guys so that you can share story, best practices with our local stakeholders, our construction industry players, and not limited to Malaysian audience. We also like our audience will be from Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, all our neighbor country. And again, we are so delighted and proud to have you both here in our Bina podcast. Welcome again. Or
Thank you very
selamat
much. Thank you.
datang if
Thank
in
you.
Malaysia. All right. So let's go to before we dive into a serious topic, I think we would like to know you better. Maybe we can start with Patrick. So maybe you want to introduce yourself and how you start your journey, your career in sustainability, in green, and until you are here. So maybe you can start with that.
Do you know, that's not a short story.
Oh, okay. We can have time for that.
It actually started for me in a very strange way. I was going to go study geography at university. I was going to go to Cambridge and read geography, and decided to just list out some other universities to go see. And I went down to Bath University, and a new head of school had just taken over, a guy called Ted Happold, who was at that point a very famous structural engineer. He'd been working on things like the Pompidou Centre and the Sydney Opera House. And he gave a talk to the potential students at Open Day about a life in engineering and life in fact, structural engineering. But I thought, that's what I want to do. And so I dropped all my other plans and went. That's my first, if you like, fork in the road where I made a decision to go down that career. And I'm what's called an environmental engineer, but really I'm a building services engineer. I trained as an engineer designing systems. Neil here trained doing structures. I trained with a bit of structural engineering, a bit of architecture, and a lot of work on systems and fluid dynamics, thermal performance, and so on. And this was before sustainability was a thing. We were trained just to be how do you optimize buildings. And when I left university, I went to work for Happold, and I happened to meet this guy on the stairs on the first day, and he also started there the same day. So we both started our careers from university on the same day in the same office. And we became firm friends. And what I learned as an environmental engineer was that in my world, we weren't doing very much about optimization. What tended to happen was the architects would throw the drawings over the fence, we would run some calculations and then pick some equipment, and that was it. Whereas the structural engineers at that time had a strong dialogue with architecture. They were helping to make architecture work. And so what we decided to embark on was a journey where we tried to bring that same sensibility to environmental design. So where making good weather in buildings became the responsibility of us and them and the architects. So we had a great time doing that.
Okay.
And as a result of that and talking about it a lot, I was lucky enough to get a a teaching position at Yale back in 2000, where I was teaching an environmental design course to architects, and then I'm still teaching there now. I'm teaching there in the fall. So as well as running the practice, which I grew from, well, two of us in his basement in central London, we grew to about 350 people with 11 offices around the world, working on projects all over the world. But most importantly, working with him and with Neil. Neil and I have worked very closely together for years on projects like the Gardens by the Bay in Singapore, the Durian Building in the Esplanade in Singapore, and we've worked together on projects all over the world for many, many years. So I'm a little bit, so I ran that business for 35 years, and we're now part of the Sabana Jurong Group out of Singapore. I worked as their Chief Sustainability Officer for a year. I'm now just acting as a strategic advisor to them, and continue to work supporting Atelier 10, and trying to spread the word still around the world about a low-carbon future.
Okay, yeah, that's good. 35 years, solid. And you have experience working with our close neighbor country like Singapore with that project. Yeah, it feels so close to us. And thank you for that story, very impressive, Patrick. And Neil, same goes, the same question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Neil Thomas. I run a structural engineering practice called Atelier 1. And with my partner, Aaron Chadwick, and I have done that for 30 odd years now. And my beginning in engineering was even slightly earlier than Patrick's. My father was an engineer. He ran a power station when I was very young, 9 years old. And in the Midlands in England, and they have cooling towers, which are the things that when you take the steam from a power station that's making electricity, coal-fired power station, they take the steam, and to cool it, they run it through a tower. One of these towers was completely open inside. And my father used to take me there when I was a child, when I was younger. And I remember being inside this thing and watching a bird kind of flying around the tower, the inside of the tower, but it was climbing, right?
Okay.
Right? But its wings were not moving. It was floating up on the current of the air, moving up around the cooling tower. And I remember at the time thinking to myself, I wanted to understand what that was. And I think that was the point when I realized. And I wanted to be an engineer since then. And I am one now. And I've been one for quite a while. And actually at the point where I get invited to come halfway around the world, to Malaysia, to Sarawak here, to Borneo, to come and talk about what we do. And as Patrick said, he and I started out our first job on the same day at Bureau Happold, which was really an amazing introduction to the world of engineering. I studied at Leeds University and Penn State in America. I did a year at Penn State in America. And then at Bureau Happold, when we joined Happold, who are now an enormous worldwide practice, there were 25 people and there were 9 partners, and they'd all left Arup, Group 3 at Arup, and started Bureau Happold. So I spent the next 6 years of my life with a partner, basically, one partner or another, mainly Ian Liddell, who was the most amazing engineer. And then I, a few years later, formed Atelier 1. And 3 years after I started Atelier 1 on my own, 3 years after that, my partner, Aaron, who I'd been working with for a little while, I gave him half the company, and he and I have been 50-50 shareholders in Atelier 1 ever since. And we made a choice that we decided we would only ever do things that interested us, which I think was a very, maybe didn't really appreciate at the time how important that decision that was, because it's allowed us to kind of pursue some ideas within the world of structural engineering. And because of the association with Patrick and the close association, as I said, we both at Bureau Happold, we went on to continue our relationship even when we worked in different companies and eventually came together as Atelier 1 and Atelier 10. Develop a kind of understanding of environmental engineering as well as structural engineering. So I would say if there are we have any kind of particular areas of interest, specifically materials and how materials work. Yeah. And so 10 years ago, I got involved with bamboo, which brought me out to Bali. I was introduced to bamboo in Bali, and I've been coming ever since. And so my involvement in this part of the world, even though we'd worked together, as Patrick said, on projects in Singapore like Gardens by the Bay and the Esplanade Theatres on the Bay in Singapore, it's extended beyond now to the world of bamboo. And now we work in the Philippines, in Indonesia, Singapore, so this whole region. And a month ago I was in Shanghai giving a lecture where I was given an award in Shanghai for work developing in work in bamboo, which is really interesting because China is very much ahead of the rest of the world with bamboo.
Yeah, all right. That's a very inspiring story. How you start? How
Quite
you
long.
Yeah.
We haven't heard the half of it. Did you hear about his rock and roll career?
It's just yeah. So that's why I think we are so honored to have you guys here to share a lot about your experience, about your passions. I think here in Malaysia, that's one of our goal by having this is, to nurture the passion in working, continue your passion in construction industry. Because in Malaysia, we have these challenges that it's hard for us to develop the interest among the young generations to work within the construction sector. So that's one of our challenges here in Malaysia, if I can share with you guys. And I think not only me, I think the audience also likes quite wondering because you both are the founder for Atelier 1 and Atelier 10. Atelier, the same name, and you guys are long life friends. Is it like how you guys choose the same name or how? What's the history on that? Maybe Patrick wants to answer that.
He actually invented the name, so he's one, so he started it. So you can tell that story.
Well, I didn't invent the name either. A friend of mine, I was leaving a practice in the UK and to start my own practice, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's an architect about it, and he came up with the name Atelier 1. And then a number of years later, 3-4 years later, we were out together at a party and had a few drinks.
It was 2 years later, actually. Only 2
2
years.
years?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. See, my memory's not so good as his. 2 years later, we were in a party, a few drinks later, and he suddenly decided there and then he was going to resign from his job the next day and start another atelier.
I see. So that's
And
how.
my take on this story, and his might be slightly different, is being a little bit careful about money. One is ONE, 2 had already gone,
There's
and the rest of them, an architect with 2. 10, the same number of letters, so we didn't have to change our printing.
I see.
Really? So
That's
we
brilliant.
allowed him to call.
And we were able to borrow the letters from the other part of the logo, so we didn't have to even pay a
Invent-
graphic
I
designer.
see. So that's the
And
story.
we could also form the Atelier 1 plus 10, 11 cricket team. You get it? Atelier
Yeah.
1 plus 10, 11?
Yeah. So now I get it. Why?
Yeah.
No. All right. Okay. So I think this is like we dive into the serious questions to Patrick. With your vast experience over the 30 years and maybe you want to share with us, with the audience, that what are the main challenges that you face, and especially while you're implementing all these sustainable innovations. Maybe you can share a bit.
Sure. I mean, it's a huge question.
Yeah.
We've talked about it briefly, and I'm trying to figure out where I even begin to start with this. I suppose if I was to contextualize it with the experiences we're having here in Malaysia and in conversations in Asia generally, there's a couple of things. One is a sort of a misplaced belief that to be innovative, you have to be the very first person to do something. You can be innovative and creative in design without necessarily being the very first person. People are scared of being on the bleeding edge. So you have to gauge your clients, but you can be on the leading edge of thinking without being, doing something that's incredibly risky. Real estate's an expensive business. It's expensive to make mistakes. People have a low risk tolerance. So you have to be mindful of that, but you have to be, we've always had to be aware that with certain kind of clients, you push them so far, you can't push them further. So that's the first thing. I think being aware of the tolerance for risk in your clients. The second and the biggest challenge we've always faced is the belief that being sustainable costs more. And I think this is really and it was even in the conference today. There's the sort of questions that keep coming up. And the pushback from those of us who have experience in delivering in this is, once you understand it a little better, it's mainly about doing things slightly differently. the way that you build, the way you construct, the way you think about construction and design, doesn't have to cost more. It just has to be put together in a slightly different way or more thoughtfully. And this is particularly true with issues around embodied carbon and materiality in buildings. It doesn't have to be more expensive to build in timber, for example. Timber has a much lower embodied carbon profile than other materials. It doesn't always cost more. People might think it does, and they will often just dismiss it because they've read it in a magazine somewhere or they've heard it on the grapevine. And I think the biggest barrier to the adoption of more sustainable design thinking is this misplaced conviction that it's expensive. It's not. It's about changing your mindset and being aware of the planet and being aware of the issues that are important to us and the next generation. And it's interesting when you hear someone like John Hardy talking about it, who was on our panel today. You know, he has such a passion and belief that we're doing the right thing, and even if that does cost a little bit more, we ought to have a strong enough narrative around that to be able to persuade our clients to invest a little bit more, whether that's the government or private sector. You know, this is serious. We're heading for a global catastrophe. We need to shape up, and the old mores that everything is that we carry on business as usual because that doesn't cost any more is not acceptable as a solution anymore. We have to change, and we have to figure out how to do that in the most cost-effective way. So those are the two things I'd say that are the biggest barriers, and that's certainly what we found along the way. The next layer of barriers is all around skills, training, education, and expertise, and certainly that is a challenge. You know, you've got to bring people up to speed. You've got to learn how to do some of these things, and particularly when it's new methods of construction, or whether it's ways of analysing complex technical problems. So I think that's the next order difficulty. And then finally it's bringing industry into line and having a contracting organisations that can actually deliver on the products, materials, ideas, systems that we kind of espouse. I'm a great, as I've gone through my career, and certainly in the last 5 or 10 years, as we're moving to having a much bigger awareness of embodied carbon as the big game in town, driving carbon out of construction. I think we're moving towards a much simpler era. We're moving back to simplicity in buildings, taking the complicated things out to some extent. So actually I don't see any reason why it should cost more to do things more simply. It really shouldn't. And I think so we've just got to stop having this kind of mindset block that says, oh, it's all too expensive, or it's all too scary, or we can't be innovative. I do have a funny story about this. As we were talking earlier about Ireland, and I had an Irish client, and I was down in, being an Irish client, he took us to the racing down in County Cork, the horse racing track. And we'd been having some meetings all day in Ireland, and it was a project with Foster and Partners. And he took me to one side while we were at the races. He says, Patrick, he says, now, I want you to be innovative, but I want you to show me where it's been done bore. So
Okay.
This was his thing.
That's
and
a very
that's
tricky
kind of the
one.
way that happens. People, he was convinced that innovation meant first past the post, as it were, in racetrack parlance. And it doesn't mean that. It means innovation is about a freer way of thinking that allows you to think around corners and to solve problems in different ways. So that's what this part of the world needs to wake up to, I think.
About changing the mindset.
Changing mindset.
It's all about, and
developing a positive narrative.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that we've worked really hard on, is how do you develop a positive narrative about this that says you get better projects for no more money. It doesn't cost any more to have better projects. Why would you not want that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Fair enough.
Sold?
Okay. Yeah.
I'm done.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. And I think the same question, but I want to tweak a bit because I kind of interested when you mentioned about Neil. You did mention about your look into this bamboo for now.
Yes.
That's kind of like
The same trick
The question doesn't quite make
challenges
sense.
in you're a fairy.
I think there's a technical glitch there, but
Typo.
you can ignore that. All right.
will.
Just
Too
stick to
late,
me.
I'm afraid.
Yeah, just stick to my question.
I'm sorry, I'm listening.
All right.
Dina, I'm paying attention.
Yeah, okay. So, again, I think I want to ask the same question like the challenges, but I'm more interested in your passion now towards bamboo.
Yes.
Because bamboo, timber, we are also like in Malaysia, as a CIDB, as a government body, statutory body or regulatory body that recognize this product considered as industrialized building system, IBS. We have this scheme called IBS here in Malaysia, and we recognize these 6 type of category of IBS, and timber, bamboo is part of it, which is we have very minimal exposure about that here in Malaysia. Even though I think in terms of resources, because we have the same share, the same like Indonesia, we have a lot of resource of bamboo here in Malaysia.
Yeah.
So I want to ask more about that. What are the challenges you face when you start, look into this bamboo industry?
I think there's a couple of things I probably maybe have to explain first in advance before I talk about that. Patrick's talked about embodied carbon. It's important to understand what really the reasons why we're having these conversations, because as we all know, the planet, we are producing greenhouse gases all the time, and those greenhouse gases, you have the greenhouse effect, right, of the planet. So the planet holds those gases in, and the temperature of the planet is increasing. That temperature means that the environment's changing, weather's changing throughout the planet, and that's something that temperature is increasing such that we are beginning to see extreme weather events happen on the Earth, which wouldn't have otherwise happened had we not gone through the kind of process of the Industrial Revolution, etc., producing all these greenhouse gases. Natural materials, wood, timber, trees, bamboo, other materials like that, they grow. When they grow, they suck in carbon dioxide, which is one of the main greenhouse gases causing that temperature increase. They suck in that carbon dioxide, photosynthesize, grow, and they push out oxygen, which is good for us humans, right? That's very important, because the conversation Patrick's having about embodied carbon. So if we build with materials that have used carbon dioxide in their growth, then they have sequestered or pulled in and held that carbon dioxide and produced oxygen. That's very good. So it holds the carbon. Materials such as concrete, steel, aluminium, all of these things like that, produce a huge amount of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases in their production. So we're trying to offset that production, reduce the amount of greenhouse gases produced. That's why we're interested in natural materials. Okay? That makes sense. Then you mentioned something else earlier on about the fact, well, how are we attracting people to the industry of engineering, right? George Bernard Shaw, famous writer, said, there are those men who look at the world as it is and ask why, and there are those men who dream of the world as it might be and ask why not. Patrick mentioned it about a positive attitude towards what we're doing. I find it regularly that engineers, when they are asked, can we do this, there's a lot of this kind of sucking in of teeth. You ever seen that expression? Our view is, well, let's try. So, and we've been trying together to improve the things we do, improve the way we build, and particularly now in the last 10, 20 years, since climate change has become very, very clear. And John always cites the film An Inconvenient Truth. I think Al Gore, is that right? Al Gore, who did this film, which I think was a big deal whenever it came out 20 years ago,
2008,
perhaps. 15 years ago. The point is the world's changing. We need to do something about it. And the construction industry produces 40% of all greenhouse gases. We need to change the way we do things. That's all the background, right, to now. What is the question? What is the point? So we are striving, and bamboo for me was, my introduction to it was, we historically worked in rock and roll tours as well as engineering sets for the Rolling Stones, U2, Pink Floyd, big bands. Now we work with Beyonce and a bunch of other people, Jay-Z, that kind of thing. Coldplay.
Drop the Coldplay bomb.
Coldplay. And the thing about it is I worked on that with a man called Mark Fisher, the designer, the architect. We're engineers, so we worked together with him. And about 11, 12 years ago, Mark was dying, and he said to me, he wrote me an email, said two things. He said, I wish we got drunk together a few more times. Sorry for the people who don't drink. And go and find John Hardy. And I had no other reason to go to Bali than to see Mark's message when he died. I left and went to see John Hardy. John Hardy lives in Bali and had built something called the Green School in Bali, which is entirely from bamboo. A school with no windows and no doors. So metaphorically open, but physically open as well. Like it's the tropics. But that's the kind of environment you live in here, and the kind of places we're talking about, Indonesia, Singapore, even, it's tropical countries. Bamboo, when you grow a tree takes 20 years to grow from a seedling all the way through to kind of fully grown. And so when we use timber in construction, it means it takes a very long time to grow a tree from small to very full scale. But also, when you cut a tree, it dies. Bamboo is a grass. Bamboo is not timber, by the way. It is grass. People call it timber, but it's not really timber. Well, it's not actually timber, it's grass. It's like timber, but not the same. And as a grass, when you cut bamboo, and bamboo grows in clumps from underground, when you cut it, it grows again. It regrows. And the clump will grow 5 or 6 times. So you can cut it, grow, cut it, grow. So, and the thing is, it grows incredibly quickly. Where a tree takes 20 years, bamboo can grow to full size, and that's 30 meters tall in 1 year. So imagine the amount of carbon dioxide that's now been sequestered and the oxygen produced in that bamboo. It grows for a year, and then it continues to mature across a period of 3 to 4 years, and then you can cut it and use it structurally. And in its natural form, which is like a tubular form as it grows, as we all know what bamboo looks like, that's great in the tropics, but we're interested as well because I come from the UK, the Western industrialized construction industry. And we're interested in kind of structure, not really like bamboo in that form, but you can convert bamboo into an engineered form, like glue laminated beams in timber, similar in bamboo. And we can bring that into the construction industry, supporting wood, not a replacement for, it's a complementary material, not a replacement. And that will increase the possibility of using natural materials in construction, reducing the overall carbon introduced into the atmosphere. And that's our goal. But, I mean, there are lots of other areas of work we do pursuing materials, but that is a major one because the potential effect is huge.
And it's worth saying that when you grow bamboo, you can get carbon credits for it. So it is actually subsidized by the carbon credit industry.
Yeah.
So it's possible for a country like Malaysia, or a nation like Malaysia, to get a huge amount of global subsidy to plant very simple plants that will produce and make materials very inexpensively. So it does. There is a. I think the world is changing, and there is a market for this, and your climate's perfect for it. So it does seem to be a very good fit.
Yeah, agree. So we can get the incentive, leverage all the offer by certain body, and it's good. And it's a very interesting fact. Bamboo is not a timber; it's a grass. Thank you for sharing that. So yeah.
No, well, thank you for listening.
Okay, so back to Patrick. So when you mentioned just now about all those challenges, and I'm wondering, is there any particular incident or situations that all the difficulties when you handle all the challenges, and that leads to the innovation? And if you can share any particular prominent project that you've been doing regarding that physical one project, you can share.
How we solved the problem?
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, I suppose the thing that I'm best known for, weirdly over the years, is a story that I have used very often to parallel the operation of buildings with that of termite nests. Okay, so bear with me. So weirdly, when you go to, you're talking about something unusual, you sometimes need to find a parallel that people will understand, or maybe won't understand, but will think is intriguing. Neil and I were working on a project down in Melbourne called Federation Square, and we'd won an international design competition to develop the concept for this big new art centre, a massive piazza, and then a very large atrium, about 100 metre long, was it 120 metre long atrium
yeah.
that was very highly glazed on one side and was open at both ends. And with the weather in Melbourne, it kind of looked like it needed to be air conditioned, but we didn't really want to air condition it because it didn't have doors, and it seemed like a crazy thing to do. So when we looked at the Melbourne weather data, we realised that most of the time the wind at night, the breeze at night comes from the sea, so it's cool. And then in the daytime, the wind swings around, comes off the land, so it's hot. So if we could find a way of taking the energy at night and storing it, and then you could find a way to transfer it into the air in the daytime, we could maybe have some clever air conditioning. Now, ants' nests weirdly solve this problem very cleverly by having big underground chambers with tunnels and passageways that allow and the ants control it by blocking and unblocking. Some of them have a job of putting mud in the holes to stop the air from blowing through. But when they remove the mud, the wind blows through the nest, it comes in through the tubes, and the queen stays air conditioned in the centre of her nest and keeps comfortable. So this may sound like a weird metaphor, but we drew up a diagram. I was going down to try and sell the idea of this huge underground energy store that was made of concrete walls in a void that existed because of the way that the project was made. And I went down, I have to say, in the middle of one of the worst cost-cutting exercises they'd had to endure on the project. The project was quite over budget, and there was a massive cost-cutting exercise. And I turned up with my rolls of drawings in those days, not even a PowerPoint, and to tell them they were going to spend another $1 million or $2 million to build my underground energy store. And so I unrolled my drawings rather bravely, and one of them was a cross-section through an anthill, and another one was a cross-section through their project, and the two of them looked fairly alike. And it was the weather data, and I talked about that. So I gave them the parallel of the anthill, and I didn't actually think that the Australian audience would buy it, because I'd heard the screaming and yelling of the previous meeting, which was the value engineering meeting, which they do with some vigour in Australia, and I presented it, and to my amazement, they loved the metaphor of the anthill. They loved the kind of references to animal architecture. They loved the fact that we were using the weather differently, and it got signed off as a plus variation, and it survived every cost-cutting exercise thenceforth and became very much part of the story of the project. So we have about 1.2 kilometres of tunnels underneath the building of rippled concrete that are really the major part of the environmental control system for the building. There's even a radio station now in Melbourne that pretends to have someone living in the labyrinth, and you hear this voice coming out from the floor grills, and it's kind of weird. 25 years later, they still talk about it. So, and there's not many air conditioning systems in the world where people are still talking about it 25 years later. So I guess my point is, sometimes you need to find, I've talked about narrative, you need to find sometimes a metaphor, a storyline that supports the kind of the technical thing that you're trying to do, and that engages people who aren't technical and says, hey, here's a cool idea, why don't we try this? And that was probably one of the biggest successes, certainly in terms of the scale of the change to the project. It was enormous, and we opened up then. Once we'd done that, we then had a precedent we could use in other parts of the world. So we've built these things in America and England and all over. I was talking earlier in my lecture about the one we built in Ankara in Turkey. So, these are the moments that really start to define you as a free thinker, I guess. But it was, I think, if we hadn't got that hook, it's like a good song, isn't it? You need a hook, and that hook got people, and they bought it, and then they stuck at it.
Changing their mindset.
Changing the mindset.
With that storyline. Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. For
But
innovators.
can I just add to that, though? Because Patrick and I told you we've worked together for quite a long time, since our first day out of university.
43 years. 44 years.
43 years, whatever. And the thing is about that story, because that obviously, how that impacts on the way I think and see things. But you have to remember, termites control that environment 30 degrees where the queen is, 31 where the temperature outside might be 9 or 10 degrees centigrade different. But that's just nature. There's no mechanical system, no power supply, no fans, no equipment, just earth, water, and the termites themselves, which is, so the point you're making about how are these challenges being addressed, Patrick mentioned earlier on about returning to simple ideas. Nature, I mean, throughout the Middle East and this part of the world, historically, people did things, controlled the environment naturally. by the way you shape buildings, the way you place trees, the way you place planting. You know, it's known and understood that beneath the canopy of trees, when you get a very hot environment, the temperature through transpiration is 3 or 4 degrees less beneath. So we need to work with and understand nature. You know, if you look up the dictionary definition of nature, the explanation specifically excludes human beings. You know that?
No, I don't
No.
know.
So you learn grass is bamboo is called grass. The
The
dictionary definition of nature specifically excludes human beings, which is
Oh.
unbelievable, don't you think? We
Yeah.
are, after all, I consider myself part of nature. I'd like to think we all do. But yet it specifically says. So the thing is, we could turn to nature. Nature's pretty good at it. We
Agreed.
refer to nature all the time. I mean, I'm looking at palm fronds here, which span very long distances because they use shape, for instance, to allow them to span further and get more sunlight. So leaves, if you look at leaves, they have shape to them. They're never flat. They kind of have curves in them. It gives them strength. And they grow that way because that's the way nature does it, because nature's very, very clever. Bamboo has something remarkable inside it. It's tubular, but it has a series, when you see bamboo, it has a series of lines, ribs up it. They're diaphragms that run through across the bamboo. They resist buckling of the surface. So that's why you can grow a piece of bamboo 20 meters tall and it flexes and doesn't break. It's very clever. Nature is very clever. So we could do a lot. And interestingly, going back to the point you made about how do we draw people into the industry of construction? Because the construction industry has a sort of slight stigma attached to it. It's quite dull, right? It's really not. Believe me, trust me. I think by example, I've lived my life, my career with this guy, and we've had the most fun traveling the world doing these things. And the thing is, if you want it to be, if you open your eyes and you say, why not? Let's try. And there's so much inspiration there that you can follow and draw from, that actually it's really exciting. Every day of it can be exciting. You need to want to do it, but you need to want to believe that you have value. I think there is a world of engineering where, as Patrick said, you're just handed a set of drawings, somebody says, size these things. That's not what we're interested in. Interested in how buildings, you integrate what Patrick does with what we do with the architecture, and with fundamentally, ultimately, with and for the client. It's important that it's designed always remembering this is about people. People using buildings, working with design buildings. So you have to design all the time with human beings and nature in mind.
Yeah, well said. Which is, when you say that, yeah, it made me believe that. But earlier, I did mention that I have background in civil engineering, and I'm still practicing, even though not that
You're good.
particularly as a design engineer. I start my career as a design engineer, in a structural design engineer, but yeah, still even now I'm doing business development, but still within the construction industry. And I'm so amazed and inspired with what you guys share, that we need this kind of storytelling to our young generation, especially in Malaysia. When you say that the perception about getting involved, career in construction is a dark world, which is in Malaysia we have called this construction industry as 3D, dirty, dangerous and difficult. Yeah, we even have that stigma, and even they label us with that 3D term. So that's how I think that's the main challenges. And with my story, I think the next question will be, yeah, with your passions, with your interests, maybe I want you to use this opportunity to share with our audience, with our stakeholders, especially the construction industry players in Malaysia. What are the strategies as an employer, for example, if they own a business? What are the strategies they need to do in order, to get more passion and interest in getting more skilled people to work for them? Do you have any idea or advice for them? Use this opportunity to help us.
I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah, Neil, you can go first. Yeah.
No. I would like to. I think education in engineering isn't as necessarily, I think, as broad-minded as it should be. I think you're taught a lot of maths in university, and there are particular universities I don't need to name, and it needs to be a lot more creative teaching about I told you, looking at inspiration in nature, for instance, is an example. But then when I worked, I chose. When I finished university, I got a degree, and I went for an interview in an engineering office, which was brown. I remember the office was brown, and I remember thinking, it's brown. And I walked around this office, there's a bunch of other kids in suits, really not very good suits, because they couldn't afford very much more, wandering around this place, being herded around this place like a bunch of sheep. And I remember going to this floor, and they said, this is the partner's floor, and you're not allowed on this floor unless you have business with the partner. And I said, fuck this. I'm not, I said, I'm not buying this.
Apologies
I said, thanks very much. I'm going. I don't want this. I don't want a job where. And I went to Bureau Happold, and they said they have an office in Leeds where I was at university, and they said we don't have any jobs. I said I'll wait. So when you go to university, choose a university that seems interesting to you. Don't go into engineering. If you want to do pure maths, go and study pure maths. But if you want to build things, go and find a university where they teach you creative ways of thinking, not just maths, creative ways of thinking. When you go and find a job in a place you want to work, not just because it's available to go and just go and see. But then you kind of need to be imagine one day you sit down and you draw something on a piece of paper, you draw something, and then you go out 12 months later and you stand there in front of that thing you drew. Imagine what that feeling's like. Believe me, I have that feeling on a regular basis. I've had that for 40 years, that I can stand in front of something that I had once upon a time came from here working with other people, but actually it started in amongst this group of people, and there it's built in front of your eyes. There's no more wonderful kind of outcome than to see something standing and it's going to be standing there probably likely for 20 years or something.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful feeling.
It's like a big achievement, what you have in your mind, and you translate
It's
into the
now built.
real physical
Exactly.
building. Yeah.
And if you go into engineering imagining that possibility,
Yeah.
then the sky's the limit, right? So
Agreed.
I would encourage everybody to go and do engineering. Seriously.
We should listen more on that. Yeah, maybe Patrick, you want
Well,
to add
I mean,
on
the
that?
only other thing I would add to that, I think there's a real tendency in our industry for people to be siloed. That you get siloed into you're a structural engineer, you're an environmental or an M&E engineer, or just an M engineer, or an E engineer, or a P engineer, or you're a lift specialist. So I think, and particularly in the world between architecture and engineering, there's a tendency for architects do architecting and so on. So one of the things that with training our workforce, we try and pull people in from architects' offices. We try and get people to go and be in architects' offices. We try and get them to work with structural engineers and to not just be siloed and stuck in their world of thinking. Because I think in order for us to collaborate effectively, we have to understand the other parties' agendas. What's driving them to be, for example, as difficult as an architect might be, or as obdurate about a particular detail or a way of doing something. What is it that drives them to and so I think you can only get real cooperation if there's some sort of mutual understanding. And I think so for youngsters coming into the profession, it's just make sure you don't jump into a silo too early. Keep looking out, keep understanding where you have to understand where you fit and what you can impact, but also you only really understand what you can impact once you've seen the bigger picture. So learn the bigger picture as well as the small picture. We're a very, very big industry, and it's very easy to become a small part of a big industry without really understanding the big issues. So I would always recommend that students spend time doing different things and not just getting locked into being the world's best mechanical engineer or whatever it is you're going to be.
All right, great. So, again, I'm so happy that, we have a very great profile like you guys, and you share your passion, your interest in engineering, which is, we rarely have that kind of passion normally back in Malaysia, we always talk about business first. You know, how you can monetize things, those things. So that kind of like we forget that back to basic, back to nature, back to your patients, ask your hearts, you know, what will, you know, leads you to. So I'm so happy that we have these conversations, and I'm so happy that I think our audience also like, wow, this is kind of new to our nature, of a culture of doing business in Malaysia. And I do hope this is not going to be our last session, because I just want to remind and share with you guys, um, by this coming October, we're going to organize another event like this, but in a big scale. This is like the pre-event of International Construction Week. We're having for the Borneo edition, but this coming October, 28th until 30th of
And
October,
where is it?
in Kuala Lumpur.
Oh, I think we've been invited.
Yeah, so
Yes, we
again,
have.
again, I want to personally and on behalf of Bina Podcast or Bina team, I think we would like to invite you guys as well to be coming back again. Maybe during that time, I can host you guys to share with more delicious food. Our food street will be
Absolutely,
always
thank you very much.
will be always the good choice. Let us know and we'll be communicate. And yeah, again to remind, on the 28th until 30th of October, you can browse through to our www.bina-cidbibs.my. So everything you can rope into what you want to know about the event, and of course I will share with you all the details later on. And throughout our last question, I still have one last question for you guys. I want to touch just a bit about, yeah, again, because you are come all the way from UK, from London, and I want to know if back there, because we are here as CIDB is a regulatory body, you know, we have this power of making policy mandates, you know, pushing the industry to move forward. So maybe you want to share, or you want to, you know, or even giving an opinion for us as a regulatory body, what more that we can do, you know, in helping to pushing this agenda for our construction industry to move. Or who wants to start first, Neil or Patrick?
I'm
Don't
happy
worry.
to go. I mean,
Yeah, Patrick.
the biggest change that we've seen in the UK since 2019, 2020, and we're seeing now in the US as well, is a mandatory requirement to calculate the embodied carbon of a total structure that you're building. So if you're proposing to put a building up, you have to calculate the embodied carbon of the structure, the frame, the basement, the excavation, the facade, all the kit that goes inside it, and you have a single number that will tell you how good your building is. And we're starting now to see in London, you know, targets of between 750 and 1,000 kilograms of carbon a square meter as the goal for buildings, stretch targets being set, and genuinely our regulatory boards trying to drive the carbon out of construction and letting the industry find its feet, because it was initially a voluntary initiative most of us went through, the Royal Institute of British Architects and the London the London Environmental Transformation Initiative, which was an industry-led body, started to suggest these targets, and then the government has picked it back up and is starting to play them back to us. So we as an industry said we want to do better in this space, and so now we are doing better, much better, and every project has a very serious approach to driving the carbon out. I think that would be an objective to have here, to think about how might you start to use those design practices to drive improvements in the construction industry here.
Okay, so that government has to, you know, embed all those design requirement guidelines.
Well, first of all, the initial thing is just to require that it's calculated.
Yeah.
Just to have somebody doing the sums, doing the maths. It's about calculating total volume of concrete, total volume of timber, or whatever it is, and using factors that we are known. And some of them are quite difficult to get at, but it's not rocket science to run a kind of an operational spreadsheet for how the building is going to work. And it's not that's not that exciting, but it does start to move you towards saying, well, actually, gosh, if we change to timber, we're going to drop it from 500 to 250, or we're going to drop, and all sort of things like that. So there's many outcomes that come from it that are not expected. You know, it is a legwork exercise, but it also can be an inspirational exercise, and it particularly drives the money towards a competitive situation where the guys who are renting buildings are going, mine's better than theirs, or whatever, and they're all it's a race to be the best. which we do see as being something that happens globally, that property developers want their building to be the best. So, if you can give them a framework to work within, that's pretty powerful.
And you also automatically you have these assessment tools, so that
Yes,
it's easier.
we have a
for all
standard
the-
method of calculation. The spreadsheets you just fill in. It really isn't that complicated, but it does. You start to see some of the decisions you make as designers having impact, and say, if we did this differently, we could have a different impact. So yeah, it's a positive thing.
Right. So Neil?
Yeah, I think as Patrick's kind of come at it from a government point of view, I would come at it from a different point of view, which is, I think, you said something earlier on about people here think it's all about business, it's all about money. That's everywhere. That's not just here. That's everywhere. It's the same. And it's if you want to earn a lot of money, don't become an engineer, right? You have to have passion for what you're doing and belief in what you're doing. It's very important. I mean, it's reasonably well paid, but the point is, it's not going to be, I think there's a kind of very strange entitlement, the idea of that people are entitled to earn certain amounts of money, or their sole drive is about making money. It's not about that. The satisfaction comes from being involved in creating things, right? That's very important. So, my point is, the policy change is everyone else. If everybody goes into their office and says, our office is currently rewriting our whole kind of manifesto on what buildings we will and won't work on, or why we will and won't work on them. Because we've agreed as an office, climate change is an issue and it's one we need to deal with and need to tackle seriously. And I think there are a lot of people do it, but I mean, we're making our point by taking a stand about the kind of projects we will work on. And so I think all of the people need to take their own personal stand and say, I don't want to do this. I want to make the world a better place, and I'm going to do that through being involved in construction, and I'm going to do, and be part of that. So I think that's very important, because I think sometimes from that direction in, the potential impact could be bigger. There is a phrase that I used in my talk, actually, which is, but what can I do? I am but one person, said 8 billion people. You understand?
No. Please explain more.
But what can I do? This is me. I am only one person. 8 billion people is the population of the planet. If everybody says I'm only one person, I cannot do anything, then nobody does anything. If everyone says I am one person, I can do something, 8 billion people say it, that's the whole world. The difference is huge. Well, I mean, the difference. That's the point. So I think anybody listening here, if they are interested, go and do something about it. Go and make a difference. Go and say, I don't want to work on buildings that are, crappy, poor buildings, not considering their kind of their impact on climate change. Go and say, I don't want to do that. And I know that's difficult. I realize that. But if we all do it, then everybody the world has to listen. The governments have to listen. So that's why it's worth everybody saying their own thing, doing, you know what I mean? Supporting it.
Yeah. Again, changing the mindset.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah. Positivity there, instead of asking what the government can give to us, so that asking that what I can
I mean, it's
to
very important.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not at all, reducing the impact of what Patrick's talking about. I mean, that was the question you asked, what policy? And that's important.
Yeah.
The government also, our government has just, it's taken a kind of dismal view towards oil. And the Americans, for instance, have just repealed their kind of sustainability rules. So that they are now investigating further, even more, the fossil fuels. And I mean, that's the last thing we should be doing. We should be looking, maybe, for instance, governments could legislate that all new buildings should have renewable energy, at least a single renewable energy source, and legislate for it. Will they do that? No, probably very unlikely. But they could try, or we could try and convince them that's a good idea, so all buildings have some level of renewable energy. I think I forget what it is. To be able to be carbon neutral, you need to be able to use renewables.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And to be platinum in the lead thing, is that not true?
about 10% of your energy needs to come from renewable.
Renewables. So you could legislate for that, for instance, at government level, but people could also. So yes, I like the idea of what was the phrase you used? About people making the difference themselves?
Yeah.
Anyway, you know.
Yeah. That's the things. All right. So I think it's, again, I'm so happy. I'm so, even myself, when I listen to you guys, when you say about patience, changing the mindset, it goes back to that. That's the basic one, because the first one, before, when we just, read your profile with your experience, you was always thinking that our podcast session will be something more serious, something like all the technical things, what you guys did in your experience. And this is so surprised. It's totally, the content is different, which is much more better, because it's kind of hardly to get this kind of content to sharings, because when we talk about construction industry, it's all talking about technical, engineering, boring, lame, those kind of stigma. But I'm so happy you guys changed that.
We published a book 20 years ago which is called Liquid Threshold, but it was going to be called Engineering Can Be Fun.
Oh.
And engineering can be fun, right?
Yeah.
Why do I want to go to work every day?
Yes.
And even I think there should be another word, not work. There's another word to say what I do for a living, because it's not work at all. It's just fun. It's an enjoyable. You can enjoy it and be creative at the same time. So if you don't enjoy what you're doing, just stop doing it.
I do think it's important though to say that, though we haven't really touched on it, the enormous transformation that's happened in our industry through we keep saying long careers, it's quite a long time now, 40 plus years. The digital transformation has been massive, and it does also keep it very interesting, because it is constantly evolving. Our ability to be more certain about some of the solutions that we offer, our ability to really imagine, to work with computers to get deeper into proving things. I have examples where we've done things without computers, and then you model them on the computer, it says it doesn't work, and it does. So the computer says no can be a factor, has been a factor, where I have sometimes it drives me crazy that we know something works, but it doesn't model out as working. But anyway, but I do think that there's we haven't talked about technology very much. Maybe that's to do with our generation, but I don't feel that necessarily that the success of our businesses has come about through our ability to apply digital tools. I think that's part of a toolbox. It's part of an evolving toolbox, and we've had some really smart people working for both of us for a very long time. But I do think that what drives the difference is relationships. It's about how do you communicate, how do you enthrall, the one thing that I learned from architects is that their definition of success is when their client is way more impressed with the building they get than they were expecting to be. They walk into a space and go, oh my God, I didn't know it could be this great. And I think our responsibility as engineers should be similarly defined. We should be saying, we'll only really succeed if the stuff that we make and the engineering that we do is better than anybody expected it to be. Yeah. At that moment, you kind of go, yes, then I've made a contribution, I've made a difference. Even if the architectural journals only say it was the architects who did it all, we still bite down on that, and we just say, yep, they may think that, but we know what we did. And I think those moments, and Neil was alluding to it. When you stand in front of something and go, I did that. It was that we were at a very funny meeting when we were doing the Gardens by the Bay, and we had this conversation about these very large tree structures, and it was a kind of what should we call them? And I think it was Andrew probably said we should call them super trees. And then we sort of pushed the two words together, and they became super trees. It's now a word in the dictionary. We were there when we invented that word, and that sort of.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So those sorts of things doesn't happen often, obviously, but we're lucky. But those sorts of little stories make life a lot more fun and interesting.
Yeah, of course. With the very short timing you share with me, with us, with the audience, 60 minutes, we hear a lot, learn a lot, we inspire a lot, I think, and I believe. Yeah, you have more to share maybe. Yeah, of course, after this, if you have chances, maybe on our next event, we can invite you
We'll see
officially.
you in October.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
definitely.
Definitely. Okay. So,
Yes, so can I say Dina from Bina?
Dina from
Thank
Bina.
you very much indeed. Thank you everybody for taking care of us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, and again, I think we've come to the end.
Okay.
And thank you again on behalf of CIDB Malaysia and CIDB IBS and our Bina podcast team. We would like to say a proper thank you for
Thank you.
having us, for featured in our second episode of Bina podcast, and to share with you, this is the new initiative by us. This is the first edition of podcast, our own podcast, and we are so delighted, honored to have you guys, such a great profile, to share your passions, to share your interests, and still, solid, stand strong as like the building that we built as an engineer. I'm so proud
Thank you.
now saying that I also have a civil engineering background.
Yes.
Yeah, you made me proud all the way. And yeah, thank you again. And to our audience, thank you for listening. And I think it's come to the end for our second episode. So maybe we see you guys on the next episode. Still tuning in. And I think last, again, please browse through our www.bina-cidbibs.my for you to get to know better about our event coming on October 28th until 30th of October. And with that, I think bye-bye to our audience.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Bina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.